Hello, this video talks about the second house. In our previous video, we discussed about the first house. Again, I will remind you that we are not talking about the zodiac signs. We are talking about houses, and we are talking about the second house today. The natural ruler of the second house is Venus, as you will see on the screen. It's highlighted as number 2. The sign is Taurus mentioned here. However, we will be talking about the second house not as a zodiac sign, but we'll be talking about the second house as a house and its significations. We have already discussed 12 zodiac signs in our previous video, and we have already discussed 12 houses in our previous video as well. However, we are going into a little more detail about the second house, just like we did get into details about the first house in our last video. So the second house pretty much is representative of wealth, and what Sage Parashar has mentioned. And Sage Parashar, as we have discussed in our previous videos, is one of the authorities of Vedic astrology, one of the fathers of Vedic astrology, who was around a few thousand years ago, and his texts are still used as a Bible for even present day modern astrologers. And as you start reading birth charts, you will see that Parashar's principles make a lot of sense. Of course, there have been other sages as well, like Parashar. There have been Bhrigu, Atri, Gautam, Kalidas, so on and so forth. There are several sages who have written shlokas and scriptures on Vedic astrology, but Parashar is an undisputed rishi who has been accepted universally as far as Vedic astrology is concerned. So Parashar talks about the second house and the effects of second house as follows. He says that if the lord of the second house is in the second, that means whichever the lord is, and there will be different lords based on what our chart comes up with. The screen in front of you will show you the second house is number 2, but this is not necessarily in everybody's chart. You will see number 2 in the second house. It could be other numbers mentioned here, which means the rulership of the second house would be another zodiac sign based on the individual chart, based on that individual's ascendant. But as of now, we will just discuss the second house, which you see on the screen and which is highlighted. So Sage Parashar says in his teachings that if the lord of the second is in the second, or it is at an angle or trine, it will be extremely good for one's wealth. Now, we've already discussed what an angle house is, which is the 4th house, the 7th house, and the 10th house. And even the ascendant would be considered an angle. Or in trine, trine would be the 5th house and the 9th house. And also the first house would also be considered as a trine. So Sage Parashar says that either the lord of the second has to be in the second, or if it is in one of the angle houses or in one of the trine houses, it'll be excellent for one's wealth, and that person will see a continuous growth of his wealth in his lifetime. Then he explains that in case the lord of the second house be in the 6th, 8th, or the 12th house, which are evil houses or bad houses, these are dusthana houses, which we have discussed in our previous videos. The financial situation of that individual will decline during the course of his life. So no matter how hard he works, finance is always going to be a challenge for him. Then he goes on to explain a benefic in the second will give wealth. So in case we see a planet which is placed in the second, which necessarily may not be the lord of the second, but if a natural benefic like a Venus or Mercury or even Moon is placed in the second house, it does give a lot of wealth. And similarly, when a malefic is placed in the second house, and the malefic would be a Saturn or a Mars or a Rahu or a Ketu. And we are just talking about natural malefics right now. We are not talking about any functional malefics. So what is it's mentioned here, as far as Parashara is concerned, when he refers to malefic, he refers to a natural malefic. And if he refers to a benefic, he refers to a natural benefic. So he says that if a malefic is placed in the second house, it will destroy one's wealth. Also, Parashara goes on to say that Jupiter is a very important planet as far as wealth is concerned. So one will be wealthy if Jupiter is in the second, as a lord of the second, which we already discussed. Or this combination, he's saying that if it is with Mars in the second house, one will be wealthy. Now, if you try to understand this, he has mentioned that any malefic planet is going to destroy the second house. However, if a malefic planet like a Mars is sitting in the second house with Jupiter, where Jupiter is the lord of the second, one will still be wealthy. So there's a slight exception here, where he says that if Jupiter be the lord of the second sitting in the second, even if Mars, who is a natural malefic, sits with it, one will still be wealthy. Such is the power of Jupiter, from what we understand. Then Sage Parashara goes on to explain that if the second lord is in the 11th house, while the lord of the 11th is in the second, so there's an exchange of planets here. Second lord is in the 11th and 11th lord in the second. This actually makes a Raja Yoga, and this Raja Yoga is called a Parivartan Raja Yoga. And as we know that the 11th house is a house of gains, it's a house of income, and the second house is the house of wealth. So what Sage Parashara is saying here is that if there is an exchange between these two lords, a lot of wealth will be acquired by that individual. So it's excellent for wealth. So whenever you see a chart where the second lord is in the 11th and the 11th lord is in the second, and they're exchanging their positions, it's an excellent combination, and it's a Raja Yoga. It's a Parivartana Raja Yoga, which gives a lot of wealth to that individual. And then he says, alternatively, even if the second lord is not in the 11th, and if the 11th lord is not in the second, if both these lords may join in an angle house or in a trine, even then that individual is going to be extremely lucky as far as acquiring wealth is concerned. So, but the condition is that the second lord and the 11th lord both have to sit in a house which is either a trine house, which is the 5th and the 9th, or the angle house, which is 1, 4, 7 and 10. if both these lords, the second and the 11th, sit together in either of these houses, then again it's considered to be extremely auspicious as far as gaining wealth is concerned. Sage Parashara then moves ahead and he speaks about another combination where he says that if the lord of the second is at an angle house while the 11th lord is in a trine, then also it becomes an excellent combination for acquiring wealth. Another combination is that if the lord of the second is in an angle while the 11th lord is in the trine, and he says or is aspected by or conjunct with Jupiter and Venus. So as long as the second is in the angle house and the 11th is in the trine and they are aspected, the second lord, if the second lord is aspected or is in conjunction with either Jupiter or Venus, the subject will still be very wealthy. So that's another combination. That's another combination of a really wealthy person's chart. You see here that people with this combination are going to be pretty wealthy. Now, as far as wealth is concerned, Parashara has described these combinations, but then there are certain yogas for poverty as well, because where there is light, there has to be a darkness which follows. So everybody obviously cannot be wealthy because of the theory of karma, and there will be certain charts where you will see a wealth combination or a wealth yoga, which we just discussed, and then in certain people's charts we will see a yoga for poverty. And Sage Parashara goes on to describe that one will be extremely poor if the lord of the second house is in an evil house. And now, what is an evil house? We already discussed. An evil house, basically the most evil of the houses would be the 6th, the 8th, and the 12th. And evil houses can also be considered as the 3rd house and the 11th house as well. But mainly the dusthanas, or the real evil houses, would be the houses, the 6th, the 8th, and the 12th houses. So Parashara is very clear on this. One will be extremely poor if the lord of the second house is an evil house. And also he says that it becomes even more inauspicious when the lord of the 11th house, and we all know that 11th house is a house of income, and he says that this becomes even more inauspicious if the lord of the 11th house is also placed and the second house is occupied by a malefic. So he says that if the lord of the 11th house is also placed in an evil house along with a lord of the second house which is placed in an evil house, and the third thing is that the second house is occupied by a malefic, then the person, I mean, there's absolute it's an absolute bad situation for that person. He can be penniless. He would be, without any kind of money. Then Sage Parashara also explains that there will be extreme poverty and the person could be penniless right from birth, and the native will not even have money to buy his food if the lords of the second and the 11th house are both combust. Meaning that they are very weak, either because of placement or when we talk of combust, normally they are, within a very, very short distance from the sun, so they lose their power and they become combust. Or if they are with malefics. So here Sage Parashara has given another combination, that a person will be poor right from birth if the lords of the second and the 11th both are combust, or he didn't say and, so it's or, with malefics. And malefics, we all know, would be Mars, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu. And when he says combust, obviously it has to be close to sun, which would make them combust. So these are the yogas which Sage Parashara has described when a person will be completely without wealth. And we are very clear here that as far as wealth is concerned, Sage Parashara is very clear that the lords of the second and the lords of the 11th house, they are the ones to give wealth. Or the second house and the 11th house, they are the houses of wealth. Or if there's an exchange between these two lords, they give wealth. Similarly, when the lords of the 11th and the lord of the second, they either get combust or are with malefics, the person will be extremely poor and could be penniless. So further to this, Sage Parashara mentioned that there will be a loss of wealth through the king. Now earlier he did not mention the king. Now he's mentioning another combination where he says that there will be a loss of wealth through the king. And we know that there are no kings presently living, or there are no kingdoms anymore. But when he talks about kings today, we can assume that people of authority could be synonymous with the word king. So Parashara mentioned that there will be loss of wealth through people of authority if the lords of the second and 11th would be going into the 6th, 8th, or 12th house, while Mars is in the 11th house and Rahu is in the second house. So he has complicated this combination a little more, where he says earlier that there'll be a loss of wealth if the lords of the second and 11th house be associated with the 6th, 8th, or 12th house, which are the evil houses. However, he has added this combination where he has explained that this time the loss of the wealth will be through a person of authority, because there are no kings anymore, of course. In case the lords of the second and the lords of the 11th are related to or have an association with 6th, 8th, or 12th houses, while at the same time Mars is sitting in the 11th house and Rahu is sitting in the second house. So he says everything is destroyed. If you try to think of it, the lords of the second house have a relation to evil houses, the lord of the 11th house have a relationship with evil houses, and more so Mars, which is a malefic, is sitting in the 11th house, and Rahu, which is a major malefic, also is sitting in the second house. So I mean, there's no hope. I mean, he says that in this situation there will be a loss of wealth through the king or people of authority in the present day and time. Then he goes on to explain about expenses on good accounts. He says that when Jupiter is in the 11th house and Venus is in the second. Now again, he's talking about these two combinations, 11th and second. So we have to assume that 11th and second houses are the most important house as far as wealth is concerned. So he says that when Jupiter is in the 11th, Venus is in the second, and a benefic is placed in the 12th house, while the second lord or the second house lord is conjunct with a benefic, there will be expenses on religious grounds or for religious reasons. So here he's talking about a combination where when Jupiter is in the 11th, which is a good thing, the 11th house is a house of income and Jupiter is sitting there. Venus is in the second, which is also a good thing, where Venus is a benefic and it is sitting in the second. And a benefic like a Venus or a Mercury or a Jupiter is placed in the 12th house, and we all know that the 12th house is a house of expenditure. So whenever there is a wealth combination, and along with that wealth combination, a benefic is placed in the 12th house, which is the house of expenditure, he's trying to explain that that expenditure will be for religious reasons. In other words, it could be for good reasons. Again, he has gone to explain that if the second lord is in its own Rashi, or it is an own zodiac sign, or is exalted, and we are going to discuss about the exaltation and debilitation in our future videos, so that you know which house gets, or which planet gets exalted in which zodiac sign. We'll discuss about that later, but for now he has explained us that if the lord of the second house is in its own zodiac sign or is exalted, the native will look after his people and will be helpful to others, and also he will get famous. So he has explained the second house related to, starting with, it gives wealth, then he has given an explanation of poverty yoga, then he has said and explained about how there will be a loss of wealth through the king or people in authority, that combination, and then he has explained how expenses can be for a good purpose along with having wealth. So you'll see a lot of combinations when you start reading charts, that hey, this person is rich, he has acquired a lot of wealth, however he is spending his money for good reasons, or for religious reasons, or for charitable reasons. So that's another combination which he has explained. And finally, he is talking that a person will look after his people and will be very helpful and also become very famous when this lord of the second is in its own zodiac sign or is exalted. Another combination related to the second house which Parashara has explained is when the second lord is conjunct with a benefic, then there will be an effortless acquisition of wealth. So the wealth is going to come very, very easy if a second lord is placed in any of those 12 houses. However, if it is sitting with a benefic, then the acquisition of wealth during his lifetime will be effortless. Wealth is just going to flow into that individual's life. Also, the second lord is associated with eyes, and we didn't discuss that in our previous video when we were discussing the second house. Lord Parashara very clearly explains that if the second lord is powerful or isn't endowed with strength, which meaning that it could either be exalted, or either it could have a directional strength, or it could either be in its own sign, zodiac sign. So in any of these cases, the planet gets very powerful. So he says that if in such a situation where the second lord is powerful, the native will possess beautiful eyes. So he will have nice eyes. So the second house is definitely, according to Parashara, also associated with having beautiful eyes. And he goes on to explain that if the lord of the second house lord be sitting in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house, which earlier he has explained that there will be a loss of wealth, he's also saying here that there could be a disease or a deformity of the eyes. So there could be a problem related to the eyes. This is what he's saying. So first there is wealth, and then there is fame, and then there is a disease, and the eyes, deformity or beautiful eyes. They're also associated here with the second house. Also, Sage Parashara explains that if the second house and its lord are conjunct with malefics, so if either it is occupied by malefics, the second house, or if the lord is sitting with a malefic, then the person will not speak the truth. So very clearly here, Sage Parashara explains another aspect of the second house, which is speech, and the speech specifically related to speaking the truth or untruth. So if you read a chart of a person, if the second house is placed with a benefic, you know that the person is a truthful person. And if the second house or its lord are conjunct with a malefic, or a malefic is setting a malefic is sitting in the second house, then we know that there's a good chance that the person associated may not be speaking the truth. And of course, he has described diseases as well associated with the second house. So that ends our discussion on the second house. This has been described and discussed in a little bit more detail, and especially so with what Sage Parashara has to say about this very important second house. So friends, we will be talking about another house in our coming video.